Good news. Mayor SoLoCo will be here in a couple of minutes. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Members of the board who are up here, if you're going to speak, if your little green light is on, not on, then push it and the microphone will turn on. Okay. We're going to get right into it. We have, I think, a nice crowd today and a lot of interest in our housing trust. So let's get going right away. And we will start, as we all know, there was a new committee formed, and Councilwoman Howard graciously agreed to start that for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Alice to give us an update.
Okay, so they met July 10th at the Beaufort County Council Chambers, and I'm going to just give you the short version. We had a good attendance. We had two people that could not make it. Rob Merchant was nominated by Kurt to be chairman and elected unanimously. And then they picked a vice chairman. Dan Frazier volunteered to be the vice chairman. The group still needs to elect a secretary. They discussed the goals that were listed by the SoLoCo, and they decided that because transportation is reactive at this point, there will be a lot of people involved in it. That one goal, not going to tackle it right now. Kind of put it on the table. But they also talked about other goals, such as a common format for zoning with similar language. The NOAA said the group could do the same exercise that was done as the North of the Broad in 2014 to adopt a form-based code and look at those. And Rob suggested doing a table right away of all the entities involved to see what we have in common and what we don't have in common. Growth boundaries and service area agreements are a possibility they'd like to talk about, and common standards for corridors, such as transportation, was also mentioned. The leverage that Beaufort Jasper Sewer Water Authority has due to water and sewer was discussed, and Danny mentioned from Jasper County that they would wish they had a green print map like Beaufort County has, so that was talked about. They will meet again on July 31st and will present at the next meeting. They need to, like I said, they need to elect a secretary and also come up with a catchy name or acronym for the committee.
Great, thank you. Anyone have any questions? Anyone from the board have any questions for Howard? Okay, terrific. Thank you. We have the remainder of our meeting devoted to the Housing Trust. We've gotten, yes, Brad. I know the agenda says that Brad is going to be the presenter, but we do have, I think, all the Housing Trust board members here today, or if not most of them. And Ms. Tammy Hoy is going to be giving the presentation, Brad, or will you?
Yeah, Mayor, just good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you all for, again, just giving us some time on the agenda this morning to give you all an update on the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust, our 6-month update. Just want to mention to you right quick, of course, I did some handouts. Those handouts consist of that PowerPoint that will be used for presentation, and also a action plan that also will be referenced in the presentation. We do have some individuals coming before you, as you mentioned, to give you our overview of the last 6 months. Victoria Smalls, Wendy Zara, and Tammy Hoy Hawkins. And so we'll have Victoria come at this time and start us off.
Okay, thank you. We have now been joined by Mayor SoLoCo. And do you have any news to share with us, Mayor SoLoCo?
We have baby number 2. So anyway, if my phone rings, Baba calls.
Okay, well, she need a house because we're working on that.
Everyone needs a house. Yes, I may need a house.
Okay, congratulations. Who's first? Victoria? Welcome. Good morning.
How is everyone today?
Good.
Good.
Thank
So
you.
I am going to start us off with our Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust Fund 6-month update, an overview and refresher. So I am going to, some of you may know and some of you may not know all of our directors of the board of directors. Some of them are here with us today. And when I call your name, if you wouldn't mind, please standing. Wendy Zara. Wendy is representing Beaufort County, and she is the chair and co-chair of the Development and Funding Committee, our subcommittee that the board has started with different committees. Dick Stewart, he is the vice chair and co-chair of the Development and Funding Committee, and he is representing City of Beaufort. We have Michelle Gatson, who is absent today. She's the treasurer and secretary of our Finance Committee, and she is representing Jasper County. We also have Tony Alfery, who is representing Hilton Head, and he is our project evaluation chair. Matthew Garnes, Town of Yamasee. Matthew Davis, chair of the Governance Committee, and he is representing the town of Hardyville. Dixie Lanier, who I don't think is with us today, she is communication and advocacy co-chair, and she is from the town of Port Royal. Myself, Victoria Smalls, who is representing the SoLoCo committee. I am the communications and advocacy co-chair, and Courtney Hampson, who is representing the town of Bluffton, who is not here with us today. Oh, she is. I'm sorry. I thought I heard you. I apologize. Okay. All right. Purpose, mission, vision, and core objectives. So I'm not going to go through all of that. You all have it, or either it's up on the screen. I am going to do the purpose: to support the increased preservation and production of affordable housing across the 8 jurisdictions, with a focus on serving households at or below 100% of the area median income, with a special focus on housing that supports families at 60% and below of the AMI. The mission of the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust Fund is to create and preserve affordable housing in the Beaufort and Jasper counties. Our vision: the vision of the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust Fund is that regardless of their socioeconomic status, individuals and families in Beaufort and Jasper counties are able to remain in their homes or find high quality, safe, well-maintained housing close to their place of employment. I'm not going to go through all of these, but create new housing. Our objectives is to create new housing or units, or rehabilitate or preserve existing housing units for households at or below 100% of the area median income, with a strong focus on houses at or below 60% of the area median income. Strengthen relationships, build trust, and engage partners and stakeholders, ensuring an organized and collaborative approach to regional housing challenges, and leverage outside funding from banks, corporations, philanthropic institutions, and federal, state, and local governments. So in the late May, early June 2023 HUD release, which you see here is the area median income for Beaufort and Jasper counties. Now, if you look at Beaufort County, the median family income, that number is just mind blowing. It's no words for it. It's just very mind blowing. Down in Jasper County is not as high, but it is up there. So these are the families and the groups that we are trying to make it a little more feasible for them. Just kind of make it comfortable where you can live where you work where you play, and just have fun without, being stressed about housing. So what I did print off, what Bluffton has on our website is kind of more of a breakdown with 30%, 50%, 60%, 80, and 100%. This is what we go by in the town of Bluffton. If anyone wants that, just reach out to us, because HUD doesn't really have it broken down how we need to see it. The numbers are they make it for you to calculate it yourself. But on the town of Bluffton website, I have posted a more feasible breakdown of where everything sits, with the extremely low to the moderate. So that's just kind of a breakdown. And if you look at it, like I said, it's scary, because that Beaufort County median income, where and how is that, how are we making it for those that, just work a regular 9-to-5 job? So that's what we're here to do. And I'm now going to pass it over to Ms. Wendy, and she's going to give you a bigger picture of what's going on.
Yeah. Vicki, just a question. So Beaufort County and then Jasper, the two. The middle where you have extremely low, that's just like
Yeah.
20, you don't even have a percentage.
So for the, which number are you looking at?
I'm just looking at the second. So you have very low 50% income. Then you have extremely low with no 50% or anything. And then you have 80.
So the extremely low is the 30%.
Okay.
Yeah, the extremely low is 30%. Very low, like you said, is 50, and then our 80% is considered low.
Okay.
80% is considered low.
Do we wait till the end to ask questions, or?
I think let's jump in at any time if the presenters don't mind.
But we still have some meat of the presentation.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'll remember.
Okay.
I'll remember.
Write it down for me.
I got to, or I'll forget it.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm number
just
2
wanna
in the
write.
tag team. So let's get to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of this material I think you will find familiar because we've covered it in the past.
No, that's fine.
But and the IGA pretty much reflects the Asakura Robinson study, showing the 5 priorities, providing accessible, affordable housing, overcoming barriers to affordable development, ensuring a regional approach for affordable housing, understanding the tools and resources, and identifying a stable and reliable dedicated source. Needless to say, if we don't have number 5, we're going to have a really hard time doing number 1. And these were the timelines in the study. And we actually, by the time we formed the trust, we were 1 quarter off. It gave us till fourth quarter 2022. We formed the trust in January 2023. Yesterday was our 6-month anniversary. We formed it on January 24th. Yay! So we've pretty much gone through the early steps: funding the trust, passing the ordinance, developing the organization. We now have boards and all that kind of stuff. Financing the projects. We are very fortunate to be able to team up with Community Works because they really know this business. They know how to fund it. They know the underwriting. They'll be underwriting the projects. Not to mention the advice that we get when we need it. So thank you to them. So that's part of the financing. We have developed key criteria, and Tony Alfieri is here, and he is the main person for that. He actually has a lot of background in tax credit deals, so he has been really helpful with that. The pipeline we have just started. Community Works sent out an RFP in May, and we did get a response. Right now, there are 4 or 5 that are in the close to ready stage. The rest of them are more down the road. Because we haven't been able to affordable housing here, other than the tax credit deals, there really isn't any. So it's, we have to start from the beginning in order to actually have units that people can move into. And regional housing coordination. Dixie Lanier, who she is on a business trip today, I think, but she and Vicki are head of the communications committee. This was a committee we just formed when we had our retreat in May. And we will really benefit from that. We'll be able to keep you much more informed. We can send out newsletters and things like that. We can develop marketing materials. And Dixie has a lot of experience in that. This is impossible to read, the action plan timeline, but suffice it to say, we pretty much have accomplished all the items for year 1 here, and we're hard at work on year 2. The one thing I would say that we have not fully accomplished is the finance, and we need more dedicated funds than what we have. And this is even more impossible, but it basically reinforces what we've already been saying. We have passed funding ordinances. We've gotten some funds, starting with ARPA funds for year 1. We've got the board structure, the committee structure. We've had a retreat. We partner with a CDFI. And we're going to get better at providing updates now that we have a committee to do that. For the board roles and structure, again, I think you pretty much know this, but our boards, we have an executive committee, which is comprised of the officers. The governance committee, Matt Davis is in charge of. He's the head of it. Finance is Michelle, and Michelle is not here today. Developing and funding, Dick and I are the co-chairs of that, and this committee has really a lot of facets to it. It's everything from figuring out what the barriers are and trying to overcome them to getting more funding, um, and defining policies that support our activities. Project evaluation and financing, again, that's Tony. That committee has put together a model to use so that we can prioritize projects that come along the way. And the new committee, communication and advocacy, is the one that Dixie and Vicky had, and I think I told you about that one already. Okay, we had our planning session on May 12th. Tammy was our facilitator, and Community Works basically provided all the support for it. We have developed the action plan that is in your handout. I think you got a separate handout that shows what we've prioritized and how we're doing in them. There were 33 action items. We're also discussing things more than 6 months out. So in the future, for example, we would like to be able to do land banking. We would like to be able to, for example, on the tax credit deals, which usually get flipped after 15 years, we would like to be in a position down the road to buy those and keep them affordable. And we will always be in fundraising mode, I'm sure. We're going to have a retreat in the fall. We haven't picked the date, but it's going to be a full day, and it's going to be more of a strategic planning session. Okay. I think this is you. You guys have any questions on what I just said?
I think we'll come back
Okay, great.
around. Everybody should make their notes, and we'll ask questions at the end.
All right.
Thank you, and it's good to see everyone again. Megan, we really wanted, and I know some of the questions, and I know that Mayor, you had reached out to folks ahead of time to prepare any additional questions, so certainly we want to be able to have time to answer those. But we know that community engagement, outreach, and pipeline is super critical. One of the things I wanted to mention that we did accomplish just recently, and then this was in partnership with the town of Hilton Head Island. Hilton Head Island wanted to do an asset map of identifying nonprofits and local affordable housing developers and partners. But that also came up in our board meeting, is that the regional fund needed to do that as well, so we can determine who's doing what across the region in terms of affordable housing, whether you're a developer, you're a partner, you're a resource. And so we focused and honed in on this. So this is now a live link, thanks to Beaufort County GIS, has mapped it. And I don't know if you could pull that up real quick for me, and you can kind of see what it looks like. And obviously, so here is the actual map that was mapped by Beaufort County. And again, thanks to the town of Hilton Head's leadership and of course the Housing Fund. This also includes organizations that may be statewide. So as we know, there's some developers that maybe not be local, and also our state housing and some of the other resources and partners. So actually, when you click on those little icons, they pop up and they show you what organization and where they are, their addresses and such. And so this would be an ongoing built website that we would continue to update and be a resource for the community here in the region. So that was a big project that we identified as a need, both for each local government entity, but also for the Regional Housing Fund. So you could go back to the slide. Thank you. We did focus that map predominantly on housing related sources. So a lot of people mentioned churches and other types of nonprofit services, but we really tried to hone in on if they provided some sort of, even if it was rental assistance, even if it was utilities, it's something associated with housing. We mentioned that also we've been focused on some of the policy and advocacy efforts. Obviously, we're very excited, the leadership of Senator Davis with the S284 passage. I know that a lot of local government entities are now looking at the accommodations tax. Originally the bill had accommodations and hospitality. What was actually changed and passed was allowing for the A tax up to 15%. It does have a sunset right now of the 7 years. The other thing that was added to the legislation that will be required per ordinance if you do decide to go forth with the 15% is a housing impact analysis. I tried really hard to say, can we use an existing study? But my understanding from the Municipal Association and Josh actually at the town of Hilton Head is that we do need to respond to those. So there may be an opportunity, maybe we need to update the Bowen study. These are all items that we at the Housing Fund are, I think, taking into consideration, but you will need to have that impact analysis by second reading of an ordinance if you decide to move forward with that. And so we're happy to help advise communities about that. So we're in the process of looking at that. Certainly, you've got your regional housing fund. We'd love to see if you do accommodations tax, that some of that goes towards your dedicated funding for the future of the housing fund, because we know we need to leverage those resources. The $3 million budget item did get passed. I know Brad has been working with the Senator Davis's staff on when that would come through, so that would add to the commitment that each of you have put in place for the housing fund to add funding, and I'll go into more detail, but we had over $7 million in initial requests. So the $2 million that we have for this year, in addition to leveraging community works, that $3 million will be helpful for other projects. From a state housing finance position, we'll talk a little bit about this when I go into project pipeline. Our state housing authority had paused tax credits for 2023. So if you haven't heard from your constituents, I'm sure you will, David Bennett and others who are trying to do tax credit projects in the region were not able to submit for 2023. What happened was there were projects previously approved through state housing. You know, tax credits are one of our number one tools. And that they're trying to make sure that those deals are complete and have the full funding because of construction cost increases, labor cost increases. And so they did have a workshop a couple weeks ago. They are going to have a quicker round this year. But there are some questions about the qualified allocation plan and some of the challenges that may mean for this region in particular with the point system. So we definitely are keeping our eye on that. But the 2023 round did not happen, which means projects that may have been planned for this round would be delayed. So just give you a little bit of sense of that advocacy effort. So the other thing we're looking at is any other types of barriers. Obviously, we know state housing is one in the community. And then we're also working with local developers. There's a lot of developers that have met with Brad about land that they have, that they might want to offer for affordable housing. They may have a project they want to try to develop. So there's a lot of technical assistance happening with developers that may not be as experienced. And some of the ideas we're talking about is hosting a housing symposium, hosting some educational opportunities for some of those folks that may not be as savvy in affordable housing development, but have land opportunities. So this is the letters of intent. So we did launch a letter of intent. The goal of that was we met with lots of people who said they had projects, but you don't really have a project until you actually have an application and you apply for funding. And so we went ahead and launched the letter of intent. I know Brad mentioned that to you before. We had about 7 developers respond to the letter of intent, $7.7 million in initial requests. 5 of those projects are in various stages of underwriting. Wendy and both Vicki mentioned Tony is leading that committee, who has a significant amount of background in tax credits and RBC Bank. And so those projects are in some form or fashion. So once we got the letters of intent, we did a threshold criteria, and I'm going to share with you that in your packet to see if they were eligible and if they were ready to go. And so those 5 projects are now in underwriting, about a total of $87 million in project costs. So the $7 million that they're requesting, and then of course leveraging those, and about 296 units. You'll see that 4th bullet, which is 3 of those projects are tax credit projects, which means they could be asking for grant money, they could be asking for subsidy, they could be it could be a longer term for repayment. Most of these tax credits go for 20 years, which means we may not see the money come back immediately. So when we talk about revolving the housing fund, it could get a little bit more difficult for those particular projects. And so that's what the committee and the board is analyzing. When would we do subsidy and leave the money in the project for a long period of time? When would we look for it to revolve? Those are all a part of the analysis. So you can see the amount of the range that projects were requested. I'm going to show you a map of where they're represented in just a second. Various incomes, and both for-profit, nonprofit. And again, as I mentioned, they're currently in underwriting right now. Of course, we are beholden to when they submit their information to us, as you all know. So The longer that they delay giving us the information, the longer it takes us to underwrite the project. So these are the ones that are in underwriting. These are the locations. And again, a couple of those developers that have not submitted more application materials are in technical assistance. So we've got a couple of developers, one in Jasper that was initially interested, is still working with Brad on a potential project. So there's a couple other projects that may not be listed here that we might be working with, but have not submitted a full application. So I know, Mayor, you asked in your email, just a little bit about our project evaluation process and our steps. And so you'll see on the right-hand side here, this is what we call our threshold criteria. So the first thing we look at from a score of 5, 3, 1, and if it's an exception to policy is these items. Obviously, we take all this from the Beaufort Jasper Housing Fund study. When we're trying to prioritize, we look at not only what the AMI they're serving, obviously their development experience. Is the project really ready? Do they have the entitlements that they need to move forward? Obviously, if they don't have the right zoning, that project could take longer. You all know that better than I do within your local jurisdictions. And when does our money need to come in? Is it on the front end? Is it on the back end? Do they have other funding in place? And then, of course, we're looking at the strength of their debt coverage ratio, what type of guarantees they have. And of course, we want to see where are they actually going to be located in the community, and is it centrally located that it could really serve the region? So those are the types of things. Once we evaluate that, we invite them for a full application. And so that's kind of the process here of what we went through. We did a letter of intent. Did they meet this high level threshold criteria? It's here on the right. Are they ready to go? Do they need more technical assistance? So they may not be ready now, but they need to work with us or a development partner to get them ready. A full application, which would go to underwriting with Community Works. The loan committee would review that, present to the board, the Beaufort Jasper Housing Trust Board. The board approves. If we're going to fund it, there'll be a loan agreement, a promissory note, agreements. You're all familiar with those. Of course, we have to monitor the project. And of course, we hope to get the money back. So that's kind of the high level process, Mayor, that would be a part of that threshold review criteria. So ongoing outreach, we mentioned we're trying to build pipeline. We're inviting other development partners to the region as well. Homes of Hope is a developer that's looking at some opportunities in Beaufort County and the city. We've talked with other developers who are interested, Humanities Foundation, that may not be located in the region, but they're developers in South Carolina. So just to give you an idea of variety of projects underway or in conversations, but no necessarily real project at this time. So we know developing that pipeline is super important. We are working on with the Chamber and the Community Foundation of the Low Country on maybe doing a housing forum. And so that's something that the Community Foundation has reached out to us about maybe hosting something to get more folks educated on affordable housing. So more outreach and engagement. And then, of course, we're still working with state housing and some other partners. So a lot going on, a lot of sausage being made, as I would say. No shovels in the ground yet, but we're getting closer. So we're super excited about that. But I will pause there, Mayor, for questions as well as the team here. And of course, as Wendy and Vicki mentioned, we have several other board members here, and also the CEO of Community Works, Tori, is here as well. So.
Great. Thank you all for a very thorough presentation. I think there's probably a lot of questions, so I'd like to start with the SoLoCo board members, everybody up here, and also there's a number of board members sitting out there. So please, if you, any of the board members, and then when we get to the public, if you have a question, just raise your hand and come up to the podium so everybody gets on film and we have a record of everything today, okay? I see that Mr. Passman had his hand raised first, so go ahead, Joe.
Yes, when we put this whole package together, we used ARPA funds for the first year. And then we mapped out what each of our responsibilities for municipalities would be for the second year and so on and so forth. I can't remember what we were required to do for the second year. I know that should exist someplace.
The total for all the jurisdictions is about 500,000 for the second year.
Okay, but it's split up individually, okay. I just need to know what our charge is gonna be for Beaufort County, so we can process that as soon as we can. Because, you know, we're in the new fiscal year, and it's time to pay up.
Joe, there's I think should be on the SoLoCo tabs on the website, but we all agreed, and there's a 10-year
Yes.
schedule of payouts for each of the 8 jurisdictions.
Yep.
Okay. I'm sure we could dig that up. I'm not sure.
And it's in the IGA and in the.
It's in the
MOU,
IGA.
so we can definitely make sure, and to your point, that's a great point. So Michelle, who's not here, our finance chair, who represents Jasper County, she's got that on the budget and tagged us, I think, for October to kind of, but to your point, we might need to do that sooner than later, so.
Yeah, it's almost like, okay, the bill is due, please send us the bill, so that we have a record of what we owe.
Mayor Salka?
Just a few questions. I guess I love the breakdown. I love to see the committees. When you have your chairs and co-chairs, how do y'all meet? Do y'all meet as a board to discuss what each of y'all are doing? I mean, I guess the most important thing right now is the development and funding. So you have 2 people that are chair and co-chair. How do you interact with the rest of the board?
First of all, the full board meets, we try to meet in person, but you could do Zoom every other month. And then on the off months, we are meeting by Zoom. So we're meeting monthly for the full committee. The regular committees are scheduled to meet in what was the off months before we started doing Zoom board meetings. And all of them have met once. And some of the committees are not going to need to meet that often. For example, governance, which has met a lot to begin things, but they may not need to meet monthly. The committee that you just mentioned, the development committee, does need to meet monthly.
But I guess I'm interested, and I don't know where we'll get to this, the applications you have, they're 2 of a board meeting. Do you discuss the details of that with so we can talk to our representative on it on off times that we're not meeting in
So the
public?
finance and the underwriting and finance project committee is different. So that is the underwriting committee. And that is actually, they meet on an ongoing basis when we have applications. And those projects are brought to the board for evaluation. And so right now, all those letters of intent were brought to the board of directors. The ones that were ready were invited to submit full applications. And I think, Tony, they're in various stages of
collection of the information so that we can evaluate, each deal and, figure out which ones we want to fund or prioritize the funding of those.
And
I'm actually chatting a couple times a week with the Community Works underwriting staff, who's actually doing the heavy lifting, if you will.
Okay.
They're putting together the package, analyzing, the criteria that we set off and creating basically a memo for an approval. So I'm chatting with them pretty much during the entire process.
the committees also report at each board meeting. And now that we have our supercalifragilistic communications committee, we'll be actually sending out more information and updates.
And then really it was kind of a question for Vicky, maybe. Do y'all, when I look at her chart, do we know as a whole estimated how many numbers fall within these categories? How many residents we're talking about? I know, and you don't have to give that answer today,
Well,
but I'm just curious.
296 units. What we don't have right now, the breakdown, and although this will be a
I'm
part of the
going.
underwriting, would be how many are 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, how many are 60% of AMI
Yeah.
and below.
I wasn't really going there, but thank you. I'm talking about, do we have some kind of idea how many residents in our area are 50%?
Right.
Yeah, over the bigger picture.
More of a, like a census tract?
We have that. We can
Okay.
put that information together. Also, part of our budget is to do instead of an asset mapping for the services, we're actually going to hire an appraiser / market study firm to give us a Beaufort Jasper look on all what is either affordable housing through a HUD program, a tax credit program, and or naturally occurring affordable housing.
Good.
Class C and D, perhaps mobile home park type things. So we are, in the throes of gathering that information.
Okay, good. I'm just curious what.
Yeah, no,
what we're
great
doing.
question, but the Census Bureau data is collectible and we can tell you. And then just one point of clarification on the 111,000 for the median income, that's actually for a family of 4.
Yeah.
So what HUD does is quotes a family of 4.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'll give it back to you. I'll probably have another one.
Mayor Perry.
Yeah, I've got two things. I think it's really important that we have an understanding as to what's happening throughout the communities in terms of housing, and have a full inventory of that. Because that's going to tell us where we need to go and how we need to push things forward. That's something I've asked our town staff to keep a track on, not just on Hilton Head, but also around the community as well, because that's most important to make certain that we're not oversaturating when that time comes. We're not even close to that now. The second one, it's a simple question, but it's going to warrant a lot more conversation from the municipalities. On 284, is there an opportunity to utilize the housing impact analysis that the Beaufort Jasper Housing Authority does for us to be able to garner 15% to fund back to the housing authority? Has that been discussed?
So on the housing impact analysis, I'm actually working on the town of Hilton Head one, as you probably know, Mayor. But yes, one of the things that we wanted to see is if we could do a regional one, because as you know, impact study could be $10,000 for each of you, right? And so that was one question that we had for the municipal association.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with the Home Builders Association on those questions that are in the legislation, because they're the ones that put the language in there to go into the detail of development cost. So I think that we just need to get some more answers for that, but it does have to happen before second reading.
Right. I think this is an opportunity for us to take a look at additional funding for the authority to make certain that the cash is there, right? Because there's so many requests that are coming through. If there's an opportunity to increase that from a municipality standpoint, that would be very beneficial. Now, again, it is a lot of conversation from that individual municipality.
Do I understand correctly that you can't use an old study?
Right, it has to
Right.
be, it's specific to the language in the legislation. So
Right.
I think my understanding is to literally check each box that you've responded to that area. And recognizing that, land costs have to be associated with that. The only concern I have about each government entity being able to do it as a regional is your land costs may be different than Bluffton, may be different than City of Beaufort, or your permitting fees, or so there's some intricacies in there that we're hoping could be generalized.
Right. And I'm stretching a little bit further than probably what the intent is, but if there is that opportunity, maybe not now, but to have it reworded in the future, for the municipalities to put funding in. So.
The Bowen study was a great study, and maybe it's an opportunity to refresh that study, because it is, 5 years now
2018.
was when it was adopted, but the date is probably from 2016.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yes.
As a follow-up to that question that the mayor had regarding the housing analysis, time is of the essence, of course, and I know you realize that, to get this analysis done. And who would you have to get approval to refresh the Boeing report? Because it was excellent report, but it is old.
Yeah, I think we would just have to maybe talk to them to see what they would charge to update it, and to determine what the timeline of that would be. Obviously, we'd be looking at, hopefully less than the time it took to do the original one, since we
Right.
had a lot of the baseline there. But that was kind of the idea that we brought up at the last board meeting, which was just last week.
And so the municipalities is by second reading, and I'm assuming for the county, it would be second reading, even though we have to do 3 readings.
Yeah, I don't recall the exact language, but I remember it was second reading.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if it was county versus. I did not talk to anybody at the county Association. I did talk with folks at the Municipal Association.
Thank you.
And I think in the Bowen report, some of the things that we have to specifically address in 284 were not included, so we would also have to modify it.
Have to amend it, sure.
Yes, Mr. Kemp.
Uh, I hear you saying that you're talking to developers about certain areas and all that. What's the connect between that and the planning commissions of all the different entities? I mean, you could be planning something and it's not going to fit into the planning commission. Do you have a pre-warning?
So part of that, that threshold criteria, and that's a great question, is, if the project is ready to go. And so part of it is looking at the permitting, zoning, fees, the planning to make sure that the project is in line with whatever the local government entity's planning and zoning requirements are. So they either are coming to us and they already have those entitlements, or they're early on looking at a piece of dirt and we're connecting them. Like we had a meeting with Beaufort County and Homes of Hope because they were interested in a piece of property in the county. So we're trying to connect those developers then with the appropriate staff with each government entity.
So you are going to the planning commissions when you see something?
I am not going to the planning commission, but I know Brad has been meeting with different folks and developers are attending. But and if there are certain meetings that you think we should be at, that would be really helpful. If you're working with someone in particular, that would be helpful for us as well.
Well, I'm just worried about you are developing something and not telling the municipality or whatever, and they have a whole different idea of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They would,
Especially when in Jasper, Hardyville, it may be in Jasper, but it's be more appropriate in Hardyville.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. And so when we have a developer coming to us that may have land in a certain area, we are setting up those joint meetings with those particular partners. So, it's a great point. We do need to make sure that these things that it's eligible to even build. Like you said, if it's a multifamily, it does align with the zoning, or if it's single family, it aligns with the zoning. And also, I think those developers would be coming to you to probably say, hey, could we have density, or can we have this, or they're usually asking for permission for something, right? To reduce those costs.
and density is a big one. It's a big one.
Right. But again, I just want to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels on something that you know is not going to pass.
Absolutely.
And
No, it's a great point. Yeah.
Tammy, I will mention just, and you're correct on that. For example, we've had a few that I met with, for example, a Bluffton landowner that approached us and wanted to find out more about the housing trust. And so he just, again, had the property there. And I think at this point, he's been in conversation with the planning department just to set up that initial meeting to figure out what's feasible for that property or not.
thank you.
Any other board member questions?
Well,
Ms. Alsop?
maybe just what Brad just said, that I think just trying to keep everyone on the same loop, you need to make that call. I think it's you, it might be the board. You need to make that call to Heather if it's Bluffton and say, hey, heads up, this guy came to us. And I kind of look over here and I don't see that a light bulb went off. So
Vicky and I worked on that.
It was a channel, Kevin, and then it went to the planners, so.
as
Kevin
long
let
as
me-
somebody,
Yeah, somebody has a
Okay.
light bulb.
okay, the light bulb went off. Okay,
Light switches on.
yeah, okay, okay.
I want to follow up. I have a couple of questions, but I want to follow up on Mayor Solka's. In one of the slides, it says 7 developers responded to the letter of intent. Do we have that list? Can you give us, because we're all representing the jurisdictions, and it may go back to Mr. Kemp's question, we knew who they were, well, we could understand what stage, if they have met the permitting and they've approached these, us as jurisdictions. Are you able to publish who these 7 people are?
We can send them to you. Yes, I think we're a little bit cautious of when they're in underwriting, to be super public about their information and their resources. But I think you all as representatives could see who those are. I mean, Commonwealth, Woda Cooper, David Bennett, and Willie Cohen.
And, David and Willie Cohen, Coastal Community Foundation.
It's 5.
Yeah, 5. Well, 5 projects are in underwriting. Yes, 7 7 we're not ready enough to move forward. But to your point, Mary, we can definitely give you those information. What we couldn't do probably is display a bunch of financial information, but that's,
No, I understood. I just, who they are.
and like
and-
maybe who they are, the project, the location, and the pending number of units.
Exactly. They're all the other questions I had. Who they are, a description of what their project is, how many units are going to be in, and, just a general idea of who, what, and where these projects who have submitted the applications.
You would like the location too, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, like the actual
Yes.
project, right. Absolutely, we can definitely, we have that and we can turn that around. Yep.
And we can pass that to staff and understand, again, to Mr. Kemp's question, have they gone through our planning process and applied for permits and what they are? Yes, Mayor.
Thanks for a good presentation by the whole team this morning. Initially when we were standing up the trust, I think the idea from an inducement mechanism was that it would be a short-term bridge, low-interest, impatient revolving loan fund to sort of fill that hole to get folks out of the ground. But my understanding, sort of word on the street, sort of outside looking in, is that that's maybe not what a lot of the folks that are trying to get housing out of the ground need right now. They either need a direct sort of subsidy to help, with some kind of incentive, whether it's impact fees or development fees, or they need a longer-term inpatient or patient funding, right, at a lower interest rate, given what credit markets are looking like right now. So those subsidies or those longer-term financing schemes, I think, are a little different than the initial sort of program intent of the trust. How does the board sort of anticipate, weighing through what we do? Because obviously we created, and I think I've heard it sort of peppered throughout the presentation, there's a concern about we have a finite amount of money with a limited sort of annual funding stream. But if we're going to give direct subsidies, which seems to be the most helpful to get things out of the ground,
I mean, you're correct.
how does the board
need
hope
to
to sort of
provide with-
reconcile exactly what method, or is it a toolbox?
Right now, it's a combination of things. One issue is, as I said earlier, it's basically tax credit deals that are providing affordable housing in both counties. We are talking to the largest home builder in the state, right, for affordable housing, which is a possibility. And that is a type of entity that would actually be borrowing money on a shorter term basis. For the tax credits to make the numbers work, and I'm sure Tony could give you a big lesson on this, wherever they have gaps, they can't afford to pay interest on it and make the numbers still work. So then we look at the situation, okay, who is building affordable housing currently? Because if we're in the business of helping affordable housing be created, we need to be able to work with those that are right now doing it in anticipation of having more different types of entities building the housing. So in that scenario, right now, for year one, we had about $2 million from ARPA. And a part of that goes to Community Works, of course, because they're basically our operating end of things. And then Senator Davis was able to give us $3 million from the state, which would come probably October or November. We're going to be constantly working on that stuff. We got a lot more work to do with the Housing Authority, with the state. But basically, we're looking at what is happening now and how can we expedite it.
And I would just add to your comment, Mayor, is what the committee will do is evaluate what the requests are. So, for example, of these includes requests for grant subsidy and long-term repayments. The good news is, because Community Works has a balance sheet of capital too, the 7.7 million, could be between the Housing Trust Fund, Community Works, could be leveraged, right? So then what the committee would do, and Tony could speak to this obviously, is say, okay, we're going to use $500,000 and put it in a loan, but to make this deal happen, because we want it to happen, we may leave in $500,000. We'd have to make that decision and bring it to the board to evaluate, that particular project of how much subsidy we would consider. But the benefit of increasing the fund, the 3 million that the senator was able to get, would allow a little bit more flexibility. So the board will underwrite it based on how much can we revolve and still make the project feasible and happen, and how much needs to stay in the project. And so that is part of the discussion. I think what a couple of the concerns were, for example, like in long-term goals is rental subsidy, things like that we'll never see again, down payment assistance, things like that may be funds that would be pure subsidy. But for these projects, how do we align the debt with some subsidy to make the project feasible? So that would be a part of the analysis.
And even those projects, the bulldozer's not going to show up next week. I mean, it takes a long time to go from a plain old piece of dirt to getting something that passes code and has tenants in it.
Yes, Mayor.
Mayor brought up something really important that I think needs to be a big part of this conversation. That's capital markets and how it's driving the opportunities that are currently presenting themselves, and if the funding is staying true or if it's starting to dry up or whatever we're seeing, because we're in a very interesting time within capital markets right now, and it is a big driver as to what we're going to see in the future. So I think that as y'all move forward, having some kind of a thumb on that and how it's affecting the projects and reporting and letting us know, letting the community know how that's working is going to be really important, because that's probably the biggest driver outside of the funding that they could get from different organizations.
We can do that because we need to know that ourselves. Yeah.
Mr. Sweets. I'm sorry. Stevens first.
I just wanted to follow up based on kind of the two comments there. I know when we're talking about looking to fund something that's going to be a tax credit or a 15-year investment, it's tying up the funds for a long time. If this is something that is going to be funded through tax credits and it's only going to have a 15-year requirement on it for affordability, are we going to get anything additional for the investment we're making? Can we make the affordability last longer? I mean, some of the projects we're talking 40, 50 years of affordability, but if we're only going to help a project that's still only going to be 15 years, we're seeing them all renovate and turn over to market rate units now in our town because they're hitting that 15-year repayment. Is there anything that we're gaining from funding these besides 15 years of affordability that we're seeing now?
I mean, the requirements that are in the current policy is 20 years. If there is a determination that SoLoCo money requirement is going to be longer, we can make that requirement. I'm not sure what the development community would respond to that. I know some of the tax credit deals are 30 years, depending. I mean, a lot of the for-profit folks do 15 and the nonprofits do 30. But we could add additional deed restrictions or requirements to it. I think the challenge would be then, would they move forward with the project? I don't know, but it's a great question.
Well, it's really just kind of going around the fact that, like, if we do a 15-year no payment loan to them, and then pretty much what they're going to do is they're going to go from affordable to non-affordable, and when they sell it to somebody who's going to run it affordable, they're going to pay us back.
We could do a recapture at that moment.
Right, but I mean, we're tying up 15 years and we already said funding's limited to just get that 15 years. I just want to make sure we don't end up in a situation where we're just.
That's one of the things that we would like to be able to do in the future, is to be able to go buy that project and keep it affordable. But we need a bunch of money you're talking 10 years down the road, probably.
Or the other opportunity, as you guys know, as part of the study, sort of in year 2 and 3, was for us to start looking at land banking.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to land bank, then we could ground lease it, I think, like some of you guys are already doing with properties. So then that way it's in perpetuity. And that way we're actually offering them land plus maybe some financing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was sort of the long-term vision, right? That we would be able to maintain that affordability. But you're right, that is one of our challenges in terms of just keeping it in perpetuity. The other thing is a couple of the developers are looking at acquisition and preservation of existing units, because we know that new construction is going to be long-term, it's going to be more complicated. But some developers are looking at trying to acquire existing properties turning them into affordable housing. Maybe they're naturally occurring affordable housing, or looking at single-family type houses that could be then turned into rental, and then maybe be eligible for a voucher and some other things. So there are some developers that are looking at that model for preservation as well.
I got one more question, but I'll let you go ahead.
Just to follow up on what John started and then Harry, from my point of view, having that information about the who, what, when, where, and their location is very important to the county, because we don't want a project to come to us and say, oh, geez, you know what? We didn't think about access management of that project because it may be on a major road. You want it here, but it can't be there because there's another project right next door. So it's very important that we get that information as soon as we can so that we can develop.
And so maybe the trigger will be, and we can talk about this through the committee, but is once somebody's been invited for full underwriting, then maybe that triggers, okay, this is a live project. And then we can submit that report to you guys. Maybe that's a good time, because some folks we're just in early discussions now. I'm not saying that list shouldn't go to you as well, but I call them tire kickers.
Yeah.
We don't want to waste your time or your staff's time with tire kickers until we're ready to do that. But for the ones that are ready to go to full underwriting, I think that may be the right timing.
Great.
You're not wasting our time.
Okay.
No.
Because those tire kickers are also dividing and conquering. And I think our staff and elected officials need to see down the road who they are. So anyway,
I got one more,
Let
just
Stephen
real
finish.
quick. I know y'all took proposals and you're looking at a lot of these that are going to underwriting and doing a lot of stuff like that. What about projects that may already be in progress, but may need things like impact fees paid, may need permit fees paid to help offset some of those costs as they move forward? It doesn't, I mean, is there the opportunity for that now? And how would they go about applying for those things separately from what y'all are doing for like these 15 years and these kind of underwriting things? I'm just trying to make sure, because I haven't seen applications for that or proposals for that. Is there a process for that now?
The county has a process. That I think, is his name Chuck Atkinson? I think.
They have a process for the county where
impact-
they can reimburse like
Impact.
60, 80, but if there's
Yeah.
some that are 100,
No.
they don't qualify.
That's
And
right.
even at 80, they only qualify for 2/3, I think it is, or 50.
Something like that.
So there's still the cost, and not just that, depending on the number of units, they only budget so much. So it may be above and beyond what they budget. So if somebody's looking to do just 10 units somewhere, paying those impact fees or paying the permitting fees or BJWSA capacity fee credits may help make some of those things work. Is there a process for them to apply through now to get those things directly paid that doesn't have a reimbursement component associated with it for y'all?
That's a great question. And so folks can apply for bridge financing, pre-development financing, acquisition any of that is eligible, gap financing. They can apply for that.
So I'm talking about not financing and having to pay back an interest. I'm talking about, hey, capacity fees need to be paid. Is there a program to allow capacity fees or BJWSA or something? Again, money that may not come back, but an investment to see affordable housing built. Is there any way to do that now?
BJWSA, we're meeting with, they have a new GM.
Mhm.
Because that's kind of an obvious one to say, okay, you guys, it's time for you to play. It's time for you to be part of the solution. So we don't have anything resolved with them yet. I don't know how long it would even take, but we are chipping away at those kinds of things.
But I hear what you're saying. You're asking, in addition to that, Wendy, you're asking if we're going to provide grant funding to pay impact.
Mm-hmm. Or
Oh, I
anything
see. Okay.
associated with that.
Currently, we do not have a grant program. And so if that is the will of the board and the board of Jasper, Beaufort Jasper Housing Fund, we could offer those types of grants, but then we recognize that those will be quickly needed funds. And so if that's something that SoLoCo would like us to consider, I think we could consider that. We just have to then budget, okay, we're going to set aside, let's say 10% of the $3 million to support these types of fees that developers have associated with building affordable housing. There's an application process for that, and then those could be approved for pure subsidy, basically.
I just asked because if you're going to give $2 million that aren't going to be paid back for 15 years, then that money's really going away for 15 years anyway.
we're really cognizant of that.
I really do think the local entities should do that. I
Yeah.
think that's their role to come up with, like the county did, a certain amount of money. When it's exhausted, it's exhausted. But I appreciate your point. I don't think, personally, I don't think the Housing
Mayor,
Trust Fund should do that.
Can I sort of build off of that? I think I tend to agree with Councilwoman Howard, but it's a little deeper than that. And somewhere in this presentation, and I know in the initial intent of standing it up, I mean, y'all are on the front lines of this housing issue across the region. I think between the volunteer board and then community work staff, those conversations you're having with developers and all the players, I think, make you the most knowledgeable in the region on what are the barriers. And I think to that point, the idea was that at some point, the trust comes back to the 8 appointing jurisdictions to let us know, are there some regulatory barriers that we need to be working on? I mean, for example, the city tied to a certain AMI, we discount your development fees by about 50%. We're working through a code and development process review right now where I think if I get my way, it'll be 0, right? I mean, why are we charging people to build housing at the same time we're putting money in to figure out all these creative inducements? So I guess that's my question is there any sort of timeline for your group to package up regulatory barriers that each of the jurisdictions should be considering changing to be helpful and not harmful over time?
Absolutely.
We've started doing it. We're in the process of sending out a letter initially, but I've met with the county, for example, to talk to them about it. I haven't met with the other jurisdictions yet.
Okay. Well, I know there was a letter that went around with like 3 recommendations, but
Yeah.
that was a start.
Yeah.
But in terms of really being sort of a comprehensive policy look at what are the barriers, I think it could have gone a whole lot further.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And you'll see in the Development and Funding Committee defining policies that support I mean, so that's the action focus of both Dick and Wendy's subcommittee right now. And so that is something that we plan to put together and compile and to present that to each government entity. So that is on our radar.
Okay. My last comment is on your the way you vet projects. Shoot, I just closed it. Yeah, right there. The number 9, geography, how many municipalities receive a positive impact. We talked a little bit again in the standing up of the organization. It wasn't so much about municipalities getting priority, but more along the lines of workforce centers. And that my understanding is that good policy is that we try to induce housing closer to workforce centers. Because if you look at some other regions that build housing way over here and your workforce centers are over here, it creates this transportation heartburn that we're already dealing with in other areas. So is how many municipalities receive a positive impact? Is it saying the same thing that I am in terms of, what is the priority on workforce centers? And because I might suggest modifying that, because I could argue there's some of Bluffton that is actually in the unincorporated county that would be considered a pretty significant workforce center, but might not be scored that way because of your threshold review, the way your threshold review is worded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and no, I mean, we are looking at that. We're looking at, transportation, location, to your point that it's not in a certain area. What we didn't want to do though is negate the value of even just because it's in a rural part of Jasper County
Oh,
or
sure.
somewhere else, because that's what the tax credit program is doing with their point system. And we want to make sure that we're looking at it holistically, but we are looking at, to your point, transportation routes, economic centers, where is it essentially located where folks could commute within a certain mile radius and not be so far away. So that is a part of that initial.
And practically speaking, a lot of areas don't have sewer and water. So
Well,
you
right,
start
but
to
it
get-
becomes all a part of your
becomes
threshold
all
review,
a
right?
part of
And
that.
that's infrastructure is a part of that review, so
Yes.
it gets scored as a part
Yes.
of a comprehensive rubric, and then those projects get sort of vetted against one another. But the hope is that if you've got some objective criteria, that it does sort of push housing where it's needed the most.
Yes.
Exactly. No, we do. And the point system is 531. And then if we're going to make some sort of exception to the rule, then we would have to debate that and define why we would make an exception. Why would we do this project over here versus somewhere else?
Right. Well, I mean, because in the case of like rural, I mean, in the case of Hardyville, you've got this really great sort of industrial base that's being created. And, well, I mean,
Rural?
in terms of workforce centers.
That's what I was thinking too.
Bring you over more often. joking.
Well, in terms of workforce centers, you wouldn't want to induce housing near the workforce centers that are emerging in Hardeeville.
Absolutely, but then that, like, to your point, and then we'll have to evaluate, is it the zoning and some of that, but we do have that as a target, because we also just want to make sure that, to your point, that folks can get to where they need to get to for school, employment, things like that.
Yeah, and we can change it. I mean, that's a great suggestion. So it becomes municipality/workforce, but there's also a common underwriting strategy to do a capture rate, to know, your census data by, really right around the project, and, understanding what the, the income strata is, within 1 mile, within 2 mile, within 3 mile. But there's many ways to slice it and to talk through, which project would score the best. And your suggestion, adds on to that, and it's a good one.
I'll just finish mine. You've got your region sitting right here. So I think this is a place to bring, and I'm looking around, we have county level staff, we have administrators, we have town managers, everyone's here. So this is a good place to bring that, as opposed to going from place to place and spinning your wheels, I think. I mean, we usually have council here. I guess I'll learn more when you give us the 7. I know we sat with our liaison, the town sat with their liaison. I felt there was, and I don't know how you do with yours, but I felt there was a real strong response when they were all asking what our wishes would be, what we would see. Nobody mentioned tax credits, and I feel like I don't know if we're trying to hit a home run or if we just do it right. I didn't hear that commonality of let's focus on that, but yet I'm hearing that's what you're getting. I'm not a fan of giving a lot of our money to somebody 15 years later. We may see it. You don't even know where they'll go in 15 years. So I think focus on base hits, and let's see how you can kind of mix and listen to our board on what I thought 3 of us said. I don't know the rest. I don't know what Beaufort thought, but it is concerning to me if that's who's coming to the table, because they're going to build it anyway. Where are we not helping the end user, I guess? And I'll go back to the chair so you can decide who to call on.
Okay, we have a couple of people with their hands raised and from the board, and we are running out of time. So before I call on everyone, I think there's some questions here that may help us understand once you get us who these projects are. So like to Mayor SoLoCo's point, if they're all tax credits, then we might have an issue. We may not. So I think we need to have that information. And I think as part of that, we should have a projected start date. So we have an understanding, and I understand you don't approve and then you got a shovel in the ground. We all understand that it takes some time.
And there might be also focusing more on the impediments. I mean, we know what the big ones are. We all know cost of land, EJWSA, impact fees, et cetera. But from what I've seen so far, because of those impediments, other than the tax credit guys who can make it work, we have a whole bunch of stuff we have to do more or less at the same time, is what I'm saying. We have to work on that stuff too.
My concern is the tax credit guys, to get their points,
Right.
the rural parts that may be the future employment centers, they just can't qualify. Jasper County can't qualify, and I'm sure there's at Yemassee and places because of the way that tax credit system is. So if we are so geared to that side of it, then we're going to limit where we can go with this.
I don't believe we are geared to it at all. We're just looking at what's up.
No, and I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying
Yeah.
when the jurisdictions have that information, we'll better understand
Okay.
who those 5 projects are, who the 7 projects are, and that may be helpful. I have one question, and I'll turn it over to the hands raised. In the start, it talked about, there's a couple things mentioned regarding, give me 1 second, let me get back to that. Preserve existing housing units. Is part of your focus or part of these projects to subsidize people who are already in housing?
No, so part of the preservation strategy is there's a couple organizations that are looking at buying existing buildings
Okay,
that maybe could be turned into affordable housing.
turned into, okay.
Yeah, or preserved for, some people are looking at some of these short-term rentals, for example, and trying to turn them into more permanent, affordable, long-term housing. Some of these multifamily units that are kind of naturally affordable rents that they're trying to preserve and not get them turned into luxury. So that's what we mean by preservation.
Great. I think that's great. Now, I saw that Mr. Stewart and Mr. Alfieri both had their hands up. Because we're recording, it will be preserved better if you come up to the podium and talk into the microphone.
Mr. Mayor, you handled my comments, so thank you for that. I don't need to say anything.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you very much. First and foremost, the long dated repayment, is it a grant? Is it a subsidy? That has been an exception in our underwriting from day one. We talked about it, basically in every board meeting. It's not great. It was basically what was presented to us in these packages. Understand exactly what you're saying relative to the tax credit deals coming in. I think as time goes on and other developers know and understand, our role and mission, we will see other deals. But the tax credit developers basically are used to working with housing trust funds, used to, trying to find any and all soft funds that they can get. So that's basically what came to us. So, in the process, we will continue to call a long dated repayment, either a grant or a subsidy, 15, 17 years, an exception. But I'd probably, come back and make a recommendation that, each of the board members then, bring it to you all, before we do it, before we commit. If and I understand exactly, why you're sensitive to it. I appreciate that, both as a taxpayer and, a deal credit person. We do want to get repaid.
Great, thank you. Okay, we are over schedule, but the last couple of months we were under, so it kind of. Just real quick, I know this was really helpful. I hope everybody gained something from this. Would the board like to pick this up again next month? Or are there any other suggestions for next month's agenda? Oh, in addition to the growth, you're already on. The next meeting is August 22nd in Bluffton. I feel like I'm cutting off the conversation. If you don't mind, Brad, whoever you get together with, I'll put you on the agenda. So even if it's only 5 minutes, I want to make sure that every question is exhausted. And there may be further questions once you send us the information about who these projects are, the intended start dates, and the more specific of each one. And then we may have questions for you at the next meeting. Does that make sense to
I
everybody?
think we need that list by the end of next week.
Okay. Is that a problem?
We can get it to you by the end of this week.
And if there are any sensitive information that you want us to not publicize, please just make that known, and we're all used to confidentiality.
So I'm clear, Mayor, you want the 7 developers that responded to the letter of intent and then identify the 5 that are in underwriting, correct?
Yes.
Second,
We want to know the where, why, what, the housing units, what,
Okay.
the general 5 points of each project, and when they would like to start. Are they shovel ready or they're not?
we asked that in the project, the letter of intent, start date and completion. And then the second piece, which may be a little bit longer, Mayor SoLoCo, is the pipeline. Because we do have 20-plus developers that are in some form of pipeline that we could share with you, that may take us a look. And that could be not as much information.
That's true.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think a couple other points came up to add to that. Are these owner rent? And the 15-year question that came up. How long are these to remain affordable? So I think, there's 5, 6 bullet points that have been brought up here that if you could, rather, not make it a 10-page report, just something nice and the top line information. Is that okay with the board? Everybody good with that? Okay. And I'll get in touch with the board if there are any other items that anybody wants to have on next month's agenda. Just I'll reach out to you and you could make a suggestion and we'll get that put together in the next week or two. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week and see you in August.
Yeah.